Good evening, church. So with that, we will start our sermon. That's not my sermon now. I have to start another sermon. So beginning of this year, Brother Thomas was exalting us or giving us a theme, kind of, right? From Ephesians 3, verse 17 and 18. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. So Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17 says like that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height, to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge. So this is kind of an oxymoron kind of a statement, right? He's asking us to comprehend something, comprehend the width and height and depth of Christ's love. But then he's also saying that passes all understanding or passes all knowledge. In a sense, what he's trying to do is he's telling us that I want you to comprehend this. I want you to pursue this God's love. But you will never be able to pursue that. You will never be able to comprehend it fully. That is what he's asking us to do. And I think that is a great pursuit to be in. And that is one of the number one pursuits of at least my life. And every chapter I read, everything that I read, anything about God's love just stands out to me. It's like almost like pops from that page, and then it is so something that wants me to grasp that verse. And as I was doing all through these years to comprehend this thing that passes all the understanding of love of God, and then in the pursuit of that, then I am, as you all know, I'm reading this book of Hosea. I'm still stuck in that. It is only 14th chapter, but I'm just taking it so slow. And when I reached this 9th chapter, verse 15, and there I read something. Right? All their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. That's what Bible talks about. God hated them. God hated who? The people who he chose. The people who always says that he loves. The nation of Israel. He says that for everything that they have done in Gilgal, that I hated them. He's not saying I hated their action. He's not saying I hated their sin. He's saying I hated them, those people that God hated. That's what he's saying. So then I have to stop now. And because, I always knew kind of God hated sin and evil and all those things. But to me, to read that verse that says God hated them, then I have to stop there. And I have to dig deep. And for past 1 week, I know I bugged you all with those little slides in the group, and then we were talking about God's hates back and forth, right? And that made me think deeper. That made me at least stop and think about God's hate. Thus, I am here presenting to you what is God's hate. So today we will talk about what is God's hate. It seems to me, at least, it is much easier to give a sermon on God's love, even though biblical standpoint of God's love is very different than what we talk about, what we think about. God's love is a very different topic that when you go deeper and deeper in it, there is even this whole book titled that Difficult Doctrine of God's Love. I don't know if any one of you have read it. It is very difficult doctrine, but it seems like that is easier to talk about, at least to me, than to talk about God's hate, because we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to dwell on it. We don't want to talk about it. It is almost like a very, very inconvenient title to say God's hate, right? God is love, but God also hates. That is very difficult for us to talk about. So I titled this message, Loved Enough to Hate. And that will make sense by the end of the sermon, I promise you. So what other options we have? God is love, and we know that it is his attribute, but God is not hate. That is not one of his attributes. That is just an interaction when God's love comes in contact with people's sin. We will talk about it in detail, but what other options we have? God is love. There is no question about it. God is good. There is no question about it. But we have this evil in the world, right? There is a reality of this evil. There is a reality of this sin. So what can we do with it? How can we comprehend it? When God is love, God is good, and then we also have evil. So what do we do with it? So there is only other option. If God does not hate evil, then there is only other option, that God can be indifferent, right? So that is the only other option we have. Because God is love and there is evil, then he has to hate it, or else he has to be indifferent of it. There is no other choice we have. So can God be indifferent? That is the question that I asked first. Can God really be indifferent about evil, about sin? He cannot. Why? Let me say this. I love my daughter more than anything else. Of course, my husband can be a little bit there. But then I love my daughter with this, at least in all the possible humanly love, I love her. That is one of those, anything that I can compare to the near perfect love that I have would be for my daughter, right? So, I wanted to, anytime we comprehend or we connect God's attributes with humanly actions, we have to be very careful. It's very different. But however, for our comprehension, if we take that love, and then I can be anything to my daughter but indifferent. That is something I just can't. I can't be indifferent to her. I can hate sometimes what she does. Even it could come to the point where I hate her for a season. That could be possible. But I just can't be indifferent to her, because I just love her so passionately, so near perfectly, so purely, that I just can't be indifferent to her. Think about it in a sense. I created her, in a sense, at least in this world, right? And I protect her, and I provide for her. When she have needs, I give it to her. I am her provider. I am her safety. I am her security. All these things. So in a sense, if I become indifferent to her, then that means I hate her, right? There is no other word. A person who has to provide, a person who has to protect, a person who is the safety and security of this object. If that person becomes indifferent, then the word for that is hate, right? So God cannot be indifferent to humans. God cannot be indifferent to his creation, definitely not to humans, because we are created in his image. And Bible talks about it in Bible talks about it in Colossians 1:17. Colossians 1:17, like this. If any of you get that verse, please read it, because we want to.
And he is before all things, and in him all things consist.
And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. So it is talking about Christ, right? In him all things consist. He is million times more, incomparably more. I don't know if that is a word, but he cannot be compared to the love I have, the protection I have for my daughter. He cannot be compared to what is his thing towards his creation, his things about his human. In him all things consist. That's what Bible talks about. In him all things are created, and for his glory everything. He sustains everything. He is the provider. Without him nothing stands. Everything will fall apart without God. So that's what Bible is talking about. In him all things consist. How can he be indifferent to all the things that in him consist? He just cannot be indifferent to his creation. So the point I am making here is, if he can't be indifferent to evil, then he absolutely have to hate evil. There is just no other way to comprehend it. And this verse, and after that I read this from Focus on the Family. Let me read this. It's fair to say that love and hate are really two sides of the same coin. You can't love a specific quality or attribute without hating its opposite. If you say, okay, I love my husband and I love my marriage, then if I'm not hating, if someone is loving their husband and they are not hating, if that person is not faithful, then that is not love at all. You know, if you love something, then there should be a hate to the opposite of what you love. And if God is good, and if God is perfectly love, then he has to hate evil. There is just no other way against it. So that is the point I want to prove. But we have to be very, very careful when we take this and apply it in our own life and how somehow justify our own hate. We have to be very careful about definition of what hate is here. We need to know what we are talking about when we are talking about God's hate, and we will talk about it. And we have to be very, very careful also that what that hate does to the object of that hate. And we have to know that too. Otherwise, we will take this principle and apply it in a very, very wrong way. Like, some of us say, like, God hates sin and He loves the sinner, and there is the truth to it. Of course, there is a truth to it. He came, and Bible talks about God so loved the world. God so loved the world. That means all of us, right? He so loved the world. And He hates sin, and there is a truth to it. But then there is also the truth that God hates sinners. God hates evildoers. As much as God hates sin, He hates sinners. And as much as God hates evil, He hates evildoers. Until something is done to the sin, until something is done to that evildoers, or that evil, something has to be done to the sin or the evil. Otherwise, He hates the object of that whole sin and evil as much as He hates the action of it. That's what Bible is talking about. If you don't believe me, let me read these verses for you. God hates sin, and I'm sure we all know about it, but let me read this verse, and how much He hates it, we will know that. Isaiah 59:2 talks about it like this. And again, if you take that verse, please read it. Okay, got it. But your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden His face from you. God is omnipresent, and that is a beautiful attribute. But when we sin, that divides us from God's face. When Christ was in the cross, and then Father has to look away, see? He can't look at the sin. He hates it just so much that we have to be separated from Him if we sin. Or the sin itself has to be separated. God doesn't like to even look at the sin. That much He hates sin. That's what Bible talks about. He hates sin. And let's see where He hates sinners. And it is in Hosea 9:15. Like I said, this verse that made me think about all these things, Hosea 9:15. It says, like, all their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. He says, for there I hated them. And we will, maybe in the future, we will talk about this Gilgal. That Gilgal itself is a great word to dwell on and to read more about. But however, what they, in a snapshot, what they did in Gilgal was, like, they practiced something called syncretic religion. I don't know if you are aware of it. It is in Israel. But at the point when Hosea was a prophet, they were taking all these ordained God's worship, and they did that to the idol. They were worshipping Baal and Asher and all these things. However, what they did was, they were using this worship that was meant to be glorifying the true God the Creator. And that is called, it was to the point of, they collaborated all these things to the point that there was no division. It was not even different. And God could not tolerate it. And there are so many things that happens in Gilgal, and they take their children and sacrifice them. They do unspeakable things. They do horrible things. They worship their God with prostitutions. Horrible things that He does. It is not out of jealous that God is hating them. It is out of the outrageous evil that they perform in Gilgal, that God hated them. So now that is, but again, I wanted to say that He didn't hate what they did. He hated them. He hated the generation that He chose. At least for that time, He hated them. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about is evil. What is the difference between sin and evil? Maybe we can do a study differently on that. But at least I wanted to say this. Evil is something that you do against a person. Maybe sin can be sometimes evil can be sin. It is all collaborated. But evil is something that you do against another human being, or it is most of the time is propelled by devil. And sin can be sometimes even our own inclination to sin that we do. It's all combined together. But evil is something like a very bad thing that you do. Sin can be sometimes like something against God's regulation, but not in a humanly way. It cannot be evil, but it can still be sin. So that is the difference that I am seeing. But evil, it is mentioned in Zechariah 8:17. If you read that, God hates evil. Okay, and if you get that, please read it.
Let none of you think evil in your heart against your neighbor, and do not love a false hope. For all these are things that I hate, says the Lord.
So he says it, right? For all these things I hate evil. God is there talking about it very clearly. There is no question about it. There is no digging deeper. There doesn't have to be more study into it. He says very clearly, I hate evil, so don't do that. That is what he's saying. I hate evil, so don't do that. That is what he's saying, but as simply in Bible. And then he also hates evildoers. And this psalm is like, many psalms are talking about how much God hates evil and how much God hates sin and how much God's people have to hate sin and all those things. We will talk about it. But then, at least in this chapter, it is like so many things. Psalms 5:5 talks about the boastful shall not stand in your sight. You hate all workers of iniquity. Iniquity means evil, right? Iniquity. He hates all workers. It doesn't say he hates all works of iniquity. He says he hates all workers. Those are people who are committing evil. So he hates all evildoers too. He doesn't just hate evil and sin and he's okay with sinners and evildoers. He hates them as much as he hates sin and evil, and that's what Bible talks about. We have to be very, very careful about that. And then, of course, God hates idolatry, and we know that. In Deuteronomy 12:31, God says, you shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates they have done to their gods. For they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. That's what it talks about. That's what I said, that Hosea 9:15 talks about in Gilgal too. They were doing outrageous thing, and they were worshipping idols, and that is against God, and God hates idol worship. And there is no question about it. And you can also add many other things. Of course, there are so many other things that you can add to the list, but I wanted to at least get these things. He hates sin, he hates sinners, he hates evil, he hates evildoers, he hates idol worship. And we have to be very careful with any of those things. So now let's see, like I said, if we are not taking this in perspective, if we are not understanding what this hate is that God have, and what he did with that hate, then we will be using it in a very, very wrong sense. So we need to know what this hate that I'm talking about, or what this God's hate that Bible is talking about. First of all, we need to know that, like I said, hate is not God's attribute. Love is. God, the Bible never talks about God is hate. It doesn't say that. It says God is love. God is love. God is not hate. However, there is God hates. That is an interaction that he have. When God's love interact with people's sin, when God's love interact with people's evil, when God's love is interacted with idol worship, then he hates. That is not who he is. So there is nothing, what I'm trying to say here is there is nothing inherently good about evil. There is nothing inherently good about hate, at least not in hate that as we know. There is nothing inherently good about hate. So we can't run and say, okay, God hated them in Gilgal, so it's okay for me to hate this person or that person. That will be so wrong. There is nothing inherently good about hate. We need to understand that. And God can hate because he is God. So what am I trying to say by that? He is omniscient. He not only knows the action, but he knows the thoughts of this person from the beginning to the end. But we don't. We don't. Not even close. We only see the actions, and we don't see the background of any of those things. We don't know what is running in that person's head during the time of that action. So it makes, and God is absolutely holy, and God is a judge. He is the judge. So he can hate. He has to hate. But we are none of those. So we have to be very, very, very careful. There is a perfect hate that David is talking about. We will talk about it in a second. There is a perfect way of hating. But we need to know. The hate that we know or we talk about is most of the time is not the hate that I am talking about right now. So we need to be very, very careful when we take that word and use it wrongly. We have to be very careful. And we have to define this hate that Bible is talking about very carefully. And then it is not an emotional reaction or a destruction or bitterness. When Bible talks about God hates, it is not like all of a sudden, okay, these Israelite people went into Gilgal and they practiced idolatry and God started hating them. And then all of a sudden that they did something good and God started loving them. He is not that. The God of this universe is not, there is this attribute of God that is so much controversial. Impassible, not impossible, impassible. He is without passion. I don't know if you have heard of it. But then he doesn't, I am not all into it. I don't know much to talk about it. But however, I can say this. God is not a God of reaction. You know, he's all-knowing. He knows from beginning to end. He doesn't just look at them when they were in Gilgal and started hating them. That is not what God's hate that it is talking about. Hosea 9:15 is not talking about all of a sudden they did this. Okay, I am now angry with them. I am hating them. Now maybe tomorrow if they stop it, I will love them. That is not who our God is. God's hate is expression of justice. His eternal, unchanging will against evil. That is what God's hate is. His hate is another side of his wonderful, unchanging attribute called love. He just loves us. And when that love interacts with our evil, with our sin, then that is God's hate that we need to understand. So it is absolutely not a reaction. He is not a God who reacts. He has this will that never changes. He is immutable God. The God we serve is immutable. The God we serve is love. He is, this hate is just an interaction. We need to understand that very, very clearly. And you know, out of all these things, there is this beautiful thing when God hated them, right? He hated from that Genesis 3, right? The sin is what he hates. Sin is what he hates. And from that time, that hate didn't change. Even before that, eternally, I think he hated sin. That is, if he is love, then eternally he has to hate sin. But at least that is how we start to see that hate of sin from God. So when that happens, you know what he did with this hate is what is very, very important. He didn't sit down with that hate and then put up a pity party. Or he didn't sit down and developed this wonderful plan to how to take them back on. There is hell, and hell is true, and evildoers and sinners, if not taken care, they are going to hell. There is no question about it. But that is not planned for humanity, as we know. It is planned for the devil and his companions. However, we end up there. Some of the humanity end up there because of their choices. That is a different story. But then he didn't sit down and plan a scheme. Okay, these people, these humans have done this sin, so I can plan a scheme and destroy them. That is not what he did. What did he do when he hate the sin, when he hate the evil, when he hate what happened by this love meeting this unbelievable things people are doing? What did he do? He so loved the world, he gave. That's what he did. What did he do with this hate to the object of his hate? He gave, and he redeems them. And he comes behind them. He pursues them. He talks to them. He loves them a little bit more. That is what he does with his hate. And I don't know how to comprehend it. I am not mellowing God's love at all. God is a consuming fire, and Bible talks about it. And we can't play with his love at all. We can't play with God in any way or form. But then this love, this attribute of God's love is that is just so amazing. This is awe-inspiring thing. You can't believe when he hates, then he plans to put his son on the cross. And he plans, when I'm talking about planning, then you have to always understand this. All these plans that I'm talking about is his eternal, unchanging will that I'm talking about. But then please understand, when he hates, then he didn't sit down and do nothing about it, or he didn't do anything, but he came and he redeemed, he loved, and that is what he did. And that is the kind of hate that we are talking about. Now what do we do with this? We know that God hates sin, we know God hates evil, so what do we do with it? First thing we can do is we have to live loved. We have to be very, very careful when we are messing up with that area where God hates. When we are involved in sin, when we are involved in evil, we have to be very careful to get out of it as fast as we can. I'm not saying we are totally immune to it, even as believers. But we have to run far from it as much as possible, because God's hate is not something that we want to be in. And that is again in Psalms 5:10. Talks about it like that. Pronounce them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsel. Cast them out in the multitude of the transgression, for they have rebelled against you. But let all those rejoice who put their trust in you. Let them ever shout for joy because you defend them. Let those all who love your name be joyful in you. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. Righteousness is another topic that we have to be very careful. With favor you will surround him as with a shield. So that's what Bible talks about. He talks about that Psalms is talking about, don't mess with God's hate. Don't play with it. Just don't be there. Just be there where you trust God, where you are righteous, where you are not performing evil as much as possible. Try hard. Not to gain favor from God, but not to end up in the place where God hates you, or God hates that sin that you're performing, or evil that you're performing. Don't be there. So live loved. And that is the number one thing that we can do. And Psalms 139:19 says, and when we are believers, or when we are God's people, when we know God hates sin, then what we can do? David talks about it in Psalms 139:19. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, you bloodthirsty men. For they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. That's what David is talking about. It is such an interesting word that he uses there. He hates them with perfect hate. What is this perfect hate? Like something similar to how God hated, right? That could be the perfect hate that we can say. Anything that is perfect is something we can go back to God and see what it is. David talks about, I hated them with a perfect hate. So what he did, I am sure what we can do, we can draw that by what we can do. So as God's people who hate, God's people, people of God who hate evil and sin, what we can do, that's what we need to do. We have to love enough to hate. So we don't have to be politically correct. We don't have to always say, it's okay. You know, when Nesia now goes to school and she comes back, and this phrase is just becoming so common for her. It's okay. I think that is what she hears from her teacher or her friends. I don't know what it is. And I say that too, it's okay. There are certain things that it's okay. But there are things it's not okay. There are things that is not okay. Sin and evil, killing of children, and taking the name of marriage and using it in the wrong sense. All these things are not okay. We don't have to be politically correct and say, oh, I love. And love should be, come on, and I'm not hating any of your sin. I'm not hating any of your evil. I'm okay with it because I am love. I am unconditionally loving you. We don't have to say that. We have to love enough. We have to love enough to hate what is sin. We have to love enough to hate what is evil. Just like many prophets did in the Bible. Like Hosea talks about crazy things in a crazy time of his life. Like he's very outrightly saying this is not okay. I'm not going to say I love so it's okay. It is not okay. That is the way this perfect hate works. David is talking about this perfect hate, and that works like this. We have to love enough to hate the sin. We have to love enough to hate the evil. And we have to say it is not okay. And then what do we do with that hate? We have to hate enough to give. That is what he did, right? He hated sin and then he gave. It says that God so loved the world he gave. So what do we do with this hate? We have to give. What do we have to give? We have nothing else to give but him, right? We can only give this truth. Excuse me. We can only give this truth that set us free, right? We can only love this person to hate and say it is not okay, but you can make it okay. It is not okay, but there is a God who will make it all okay. That is what we have to do. And that is the only strategy that we can work with this hate. When we perfectly hate sin and evil, and that is the only way to do. And that is true for us too. So now this, finally I put this little, I don't know what you call the phrase, or a punch, or whatever it is. He loved us enough to hate our evil. He didn't love us enough to say, I'm indifferent of your evil. He didn't love us enough to say, okay, everybody is inclusive, come on, I'm taking everybody. He didn't say that. He loved us enough to hate our evil. He said, it is not okay. I hated them at Gilgal for all their evildoers. They killed their children and I am not okay with it. And that is what God said. And he hated our evil enough to pay the ransom. When he hated the sin, he didn't sit there and did nothing about it. He didn't say, okay, it's fine, I'm going to hate them and I'm going to plan a scheme to destroy them. That is not what he did. He loved us, he hated our sin enough to pay the ransom. And that ransom is not a joke. That ransom is not a simple thing. When we look at the cross, there are so many things that cross is talking about. We need to really understand. And his ransom is enough for him to love us forever. That is what he did. When he hated our evil, he paid the ransom and he gained once for all the ticket so he can love us forever and ever and ever. And finally, that is exactly what we should do. With this love and the hate that we are talking about in this life, we should love the people we love enough to hate their evil and our own evil too. And we should hate their evil enough to give the only thing that we have, that is God and his gospel. And we should hate them with this perfect hate that Bible is talking about. And we should by all means refrain from any other hate that we harbor in our heart. May God bless.